All right. My name is Benjamin Brandenburg. I am a historian here at Montreat College. I'd like to briefly share with you about a very exciting event that's occurring this Friday. It's an all-day event called Legacies to Live By. It's celebrating two families, Nelson Bell, some of you may have been in his library, and Billy Graham. Nelson Bell, of course, a famous churchman, a heroic missionary who survived civil war in China to come back and make his home here in Montreat. Billy Graham, many of you know Billy Graham. Billy Graham has spoken to more people, arguably in human history, than anyone else of all time. That's pretty impressive, probably over 200 million people. And of course, Billy Graham, at the lovely age of 96, still resides in Montreat. Both of those families are coming into Montreat. We'll have a series of events. A few things about that. On Friday at 10 o'clock, Leighton Ford, Billy Graham's son-in-law, also all-star events, is coming to speak. He's a great speaker, so a great convocation to attend. At 1 o'clock, there is a walking tour. If you're curious to see Billy Graham's office, his personal office with all his pictures, that's where the tour will end. So you are welcome to come to that. But we really would love you if you would come to the 3 p.m. academic forum. You'll receive chapel credit for that. We're having Grant Wacker, who's a great historian, recently wrote a biography of Billy Graham, and he'll be doing sort of a chat, a more relaxed chat. And the opening act is the Tommy Coombs Band, the official Billy Graham band. So a lot of talent on display. So 10 a.m. convocation, 1 o'clock walking tour. But we would love it, especially if you came right here at 3 o'clock to the academic forum. Thanks, folks.
Good morning, Montreat College. Let's try that again. Good morning, Montreat College. Great to have you here. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenter this morning. David Johnson is someone I became acquainted with about 3 years ago when we had the opportunity to travel together to Burma, which is now known as Myanmar, which is located a very long way from here. It was about a 30-hour trip to get there, 5 different plane rides, and David and I were there working with another one of our guests here this morning, Fritz Kling, who's sitting back here. Fritz, would you just raise your hand for us? Fritz spoke last night in convocation in Chapel the Prodigal, was in class yesterday sharing about his experience as a minister of the gospel in a Buddhist country in Myanmar. David and Fritz and I were there together almost 3 years ago, and I learned that David is a storyteller, and a very, very fine storyteller, and he does it through the medium of photography and videography. And so David is a graduate of University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He and his wife Andrea and their 2 daughters. Andrea, would you raise your hand? Where's Andrea? There you are. Andrea, welcome you as well. And their 2 daughters live outside of Charlotte, so just a couple hours from here. And David, if you've not been to the Silent Images website, I'd encourage you to go there and see some of the spectacular photography and videos that David has produced. David left teaching. He was teaching English and coaching tennis, and he left to start Silent Images in 2006. And since then, they have served over 400 charities and nonprofit organizations in 25 countries around the world. Would you please join me in welcoming David Johnson?
Thank you. You guys, I know you already know this, but Dr. Maurer is an amazing leader. I obviously got to spend time with him in Burma, but also was able to have dinner with him last night and heard the vision for Montreat and kind of the story of where you guys have come and where you're going. And it is really, really exciting. I know sometimes when you're in the midst of it, you may not pause long enough to kind of capture what the Lord is doing here, but he's doing something special. And I know Isaiah 43 has kind of been your heartbeat of this campus, and you are truly a testimony. And so I'm excited to see what lies ahead of you. So it's a privilege to be here. It's always kind of odd being invited to chapels because I'm not a pastor. I'm not even a cool musician. I'm just simply a photographer. And we take our photographs around the world and we use them to serve. And so it's always quite humbling and a privilege to be here. And really it's very little about my own story that I'm going to be sharing that going to have much impact. It's more the story of those we've had the privilege to meet. Because the stories of those that we've documented really are the heartbeat and the foundation of everything I'm going to share with you. And I hope that as you hear their stories, you start to reflect on your own story and what God is doing with your story, and you're in the midst of some exciting times of your story, and so I look forward to hopefully inspiring you through their stories and hopefully asking some questions that will provoke you to wonder what God's going to do with yours. And so my story with the It's the first genocide of the 21st century. It was brutal to go in there and to document what the oppressors are doing to the people in Darfur, Sudan. And I went in the back of a big cargo plane with a ministry that was bringing lots of cargo of food and mosquito nets and aid. And all I was carrying was this. And I felt kind of silly at times wondering, gosh, they're doing so many important things. And then a Sudanese man who was there reminded me of my mission. He was there to protect me. He was carrying a big AK-47, and he slept outside of my tent. He kind of was my shadow for the week that I was there. But he turned to me after a couple of days, and he said, you know what the most dangerous weapon in this camp is? He said, it's not my gun. He said, it's your camera. He said, my bullets only shoot so far, but your images are boundless. Your images are the things that inspire people to take action. It's what oppressors fear the most. That's why we see journalists being beheaded, right? Because they're carrying something that is directly fighting injustice. And it was at that moment, it also hit me, it's not necessarily what we have in our hands, it's how we use what we have in our hands. And it goes for me and it goes for you, right? Because we can look at the things in our hands and say, how could God use this? But that man reminded me, no, it's not what you have, it's how you use it. If you're going to use it to fight injustice, God can use that. And so one of my questions for you throughout this morning is going to be, what do you have in your hands? What is it that you have that sometimes we look down and we say, God, could you really use that? Now, when I came back to the States in 2006, there was a story. Of course, I have all these images of oppression in my mind, and I come back to our discussion here in America, and you were probably in middle school at this time, but this was the headline news when I landed. Funny, but also really embarrassing. A reflection of our culture, a reflection of the stories that sometimes we tell, even as the church, even as Christians, and we forget that there are other stories happening around the world. And so that was really at that moment, sitting in the airport in New York, landing and kind of re-entering my own culture, that Proverbs 31:8 was laid on my heart to speak up for those who can't speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. And that was the foundation for Silent Images. And it was really at that moment I started making phone calls, trying to find other Christian filmmakers and photographers saying, there's stories to tell. Our country is not listening. Our nation is distracted by things that are completely insignificant. We have got to put these stories out there. And so that really was the birth of Silent Images. And we've continued to do that, whether it's telling stories right here in North Carolina or telling stories around the world. Obviously, in the last year or so, you can imagine the stories we've been documenting. My team and I, it's been Ebola, It's been, I've spent some time in Ukraine near the border of Russia as to what's happening there. Of course, Burma, Myanmar, has been an ongoing project that we've been telling stories there and really also empowering people to tell their own story. And I may not have time to talk a whole lot about that, but it is a huge part of our mission now is to put cameras in other people's hands and empower them to tell their own story. So in some of the classes I'll speak at today, I'll talk more about that. I'm going to show you a short video here, and it's a video that's going to focus on local stories, and then we'll spend the rest of our time talking international. But I think it's good to start local, because sometimes we forget the needs right around us. And so my team and I obviously were based in Charlotte, and so we produced this very short 4-minute film that is exactly 100 words that opens the eyes to the stories and the needs right in the Charlotte community. And hopefully it'll cause you to stop and consider other people's stories that are just nearby.
My family members that struggling. When I grow up, I want to stop the killing.
A lot of people died in a refugee camp. Maybe we're the next one, I don't know. When my mom told me we were going to America,
Another man ended up raping me, videotaping the scenario and selling it on the internet. My dream for the next generation of girls would be that they can do whatever they want to do without fear of being raped or trafficked.
I just noticed everybody walked by. He asked me, how's your day going? That made me feel human.
ever been to Charlotte, a lot of that would probably shock you because it's a beautiful city, well manicured, and if you stay on the right roads, you don't see any of that. Or if you stay busy enough, you never have to pause to listen to the stories. But the reality is there are stories. We all have a story, don't we? And I would say one of the most difficult parts of our culture is that because everything is so fast-paced, we rarely take the time to ask someone simply that question, what's your story? Or to take the time, obviously, to listen to their full story. And I think with our culture today, I really do believe also that this question of how we see the world impacts how we serve. Now, our culture puts things in front of us that significant, and they are simply entertaining. Now, the sad part is all these images I took off the front page of our major news sources, CNN and Fox News. Equal opportunity, and they equally failed. These are the stories for the past year and a half they put in front of you saying, if you want to know what's going on and know how to participate in the conversation of our culture, here's the conversation. Now, our challenge, of course, and this to me is a reflection of a culture that has a sensational desire for distraction. We love to be distracted from things which are significant. There's a sense that we just are addicted to anything that will take me away or kind of escape whatever I need to escape. And we know that as Christians, God calls us to see the world differently. Now, I don't want to sound like a prune, like this is all bad and entertainment is bad. I mean, it's fine. You can go to ESPN. You can go to the entertainment sites. But hopefully we go to those places, and that's where we expect to be entertained. We don't expect to turn on the news and continue to be entertained. And so the challenge for you at Montreat here is to say, how do I, obviously, Mark Twain said, never let the walls of the classroom inhibit your education. Education is happening all the time, so how are you actively saying, I can't, just rely on, of course, the classroom. When I go outside the classroom, I have to be proactive in looking for God stories and the needs around the world because I can't rely on just the news stations to give it to me. One challenge I often give to university students is a 30-day challenge. And ask yourself, what's on your homepage of your computer? Is it ESPN? Is it Facebook? What is it? But I would challenge you for 30 days, make it a reliable international news source, like the BBC News. And just challenge yourself for 30 days. Every day when you open up your computer, you at least know what's the conversation around the world so that you know, hey, when I leave here from Montreat, I know how to engage, where to engage in a broken world. Maybe actively participating, but also prayerfully. And you'll begin to see the world differently. This will begin to fade. And you'll say, God, I want to see the world the way you see it. And stories will begin to pop up of Omar al-Bashir. This is the man behind the genocide in Sudan right now. Or great heroes or heroines like Aung San Suu Kyi in Burma. Of course, you guys probably know his face because he was made popular a few years ago, right? Who's this? Kony, Joseph Kony. Did that happen here at Montreat? All the signs go up and whatnot. And I would love if we had more time to talk about how effective was that campaign. Sometimes do we jump on things because they're cool and we get a T-shirt and we post something on our Facebook, but really, did we really care about what was going on in Uganda? And were we fully informed what was happening in Uganda with Joseph Kony? The reality is he's not even in Uganda. He's in the Congo. And I don't know if you saw what happened after they showed that video. Of course, that video went viral here in the States. But when they showed the video to the Ugandan people, they threw rocks at it. Because they were so frustrated. The Americans depicting the Ugandan people in the same way. And it was not the full story. We did not understand their full story. Uganda is really a place that God has restored in so many ways. There's peace happening. We did a short film called The Hope of Uganda shortly after the Invisible Children to kind of balance out that, hey, there is reconciliation in northern Uganda. There's more of a story, but that doesn't sell as well, does it? If you can sell little children continuing to be trafficked, that sells well. And so there's a lot of controversy, and of course there was controversy that happened after that film. If I'm in your class today, I'd be happy to talk through more about kind of when particularly university students get around campaigns and how they can be more effective when things do get brought to the forefront. So it wasn't all bad because we know who Joseph Kony is now at least. He's still on the run, of course. Homelessness, human trafficking, which of course, was that shocking? Charlotte ranked top 10 in the nation for human trafficking. Number 1 city for human trafficking in the nation is Atlanta, Georgia. I-85 connects Atlanta through Charlotte, so those young girls and boys are trafficked right through. They come into Atlanta and they're trafficked right through Charlotte. Many of them on their way up to New York or different places. So we have got to be vigilant, knowing that human trafficking, of course, we often think of this happening in Cambodia and Thailand, and of course it is, but it's happening right here. Haiti. When's the last time you heard Haiti on the news? It's been a while, right? Has anybody been there recently to Haiti? Does it look totally restored and put back together? No, of course not. It is still a tragic place. Now, Haiti is a mess in so many ways and complicated, but the reality is it's not on the news. Of course, it was all over the news during the earthquake. I was there shortly after the earthquake, and I was there within the last, or my team has been there in the last 6 months, and it still looks the same. Just because it's not on the news doesn't mean we don't pay attention to it. Abortion. No, it's controversial, but the reality is there's 3,000 children aborted every day in America. I don't know anybody who would applaud that and say, yes, there needs to be more, right? So whatever side of the aisle you're on, the reality is this isn't good. Something needs to be addressed here. And these stories are happening every day. So the challenge for us is to say, now I know, even I can see it in your eyes as you're looking at all these, you're saying, this is hard, and this is why we changed the channel. This is why the news sources put entertainment in front of us, because of course that drives up ratings, because it's much easier to digest and laugh at, Britney Spears than it is to talk about human trafficking. But as Christians, we're called to see the world a little bit differently. And the reality is, as Christians, we know, the beautiful part is we know the end of the story. First of all, we're not shocked at this, are we? We shouldn't be, because we know it's a broken world. We know it's broken, but we also know the end of the story. We know that God ultimately is the capital J justifier. He will justify this broken world. And I don't have to feel responsibility to solve all of this, but for whatever reason, he calls me to participate. And with joy, I can say, how am I going to participate in his story of redeeming the world? Of taking one girl who might have been at risk of being trafficked, and I tutor her and keep her in school so she doesn't get trafficked. What is the part of the story that I'm going to play? And maybe it's just picking up a silly camera, or maybe it's picking up your guitar or your paintbrush or your whatever it is that you say, I'm going to pick this up and I'm going to participate in his story. The flip side is, the danger is that often when the news does decide to put on kind of imagery of global poverty, this is what they choose to put on front page. And I know it's highly used, because if you Google search Uganda or Ethiopia, these are one of the first 2 images that appear. So remember, my question of how we see the world often impacts how we choose to serve the world. If we see then, if we have never been overseas, and if we see global poverty this way, does this impact the way that we go out with missions? Absolutely. And there's a danger if we see people in poverty only being corrupt and being helpless. All of a sudden, who is in danger of thinking we are the saviors of these poor, helpless people? Have you seen this on mission trips? Where people go in thinking we have all the answers, and all of a sudden some chief of the tribe walks up and goes, we could have built that too. And that's one of the things often when particularly for Haiti, I would tell people when they'd go down and mission trips would want to build things, I'd say, the Haitians are very competent people. They're actually much better builders than we are in many ways. Now, not all the time. Obviously, there's professional architects and people who can facilitate some of that. But often, I would ask a mission team, if you're going to go down and build this building, how about you hire 2 Haitians to work alongside you? And you do it together. And at the end of the day, who owns that building? The Haitians do. There's dignity. There's cooperation. There is not this, well, just because we come from the United States and we might have more money, that doesn't mean we're smarter. Nor does our poverty level equate our spiritual maturity. Just because somebody's poor doesn't mean that they're spiritually immature. I often hear people make the assumption, I'm going to go into the slums of Uganda and share Jesus. And I'm going, oh my goodness, have you talked to the pastors in Uganda? Because they have taught me a few things about Jesus. And so there is danger if we allow the imagery of our world to educate us and inform us how we are going to go when we graduate from Montreat and go enter this broken world. And hopefully we go out saying, you know what, I don't have all the answers. And I don't know what to do, but I know that the Lord tells me that he is going to justify this world, and I also know he calls me to participate. And it might be me just going and assisting some great leader in Uganda who's really going to restore those slums there. So back to one of my original questions for you is, hopefully what's running through your head right now is, what's in my hands? What is it that I am beginning to look down, as you're going through your journey here at Montreat, what is it that I'm learning is in my hands? And how am I going to use it? Because we know, you've been through this education thing for a while. Education, and you can look at it 2 different ways. Either you're going to be educated so you can go enter this world and go get a great job and make a lot of money. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as you use that money in the right way. Or your goal is going to be, here at Montreat, I'm going to discover what my passions are, what my skills are, so then I can graduate, get a job, and make a difference. How am I going to use what I have in order to make a difference in this world? And part of that is understanding where I could be needed around the world. So there's a great story of a man who was given a lot in his hands, and honestly, he blew it, right? We know Solomon asked for what? Wisdom. And he's given, but then the Lord gave him what? Wisdom and wealth. He was given much more than even he asked for, and he looked down in his hands and he said, I have lots of wisdom, I have lots of wealth, I have lots of opportunity to impact. And we know the end of his story. Many of us jump to the end of his story where he's kind of given himself to idols, and that is the end of his story. But there was something very subtle that happened in the middle of his journey that I think really warns us as to how we can, in very subtle ways, give ourselves that ultimately could lead to us waking up at 50 years old going, I've been giving myself to idolatry, to myself. How long did Solomon spend on the Lord's temple? Building the Lord's temple? 7 years, long time, right? He could say, Lord, I have given you 7 years of my life. But if we read the first verse of the next chapter, how much time did he give to his own temple? Almost twice as much. God had given him wisdom and wealth and obviously skill to build. And he said, God, I'm going to give you just enough, but I'm going to spend twice as much of my own, what I have in my hands, on myself. And we know the end of his story. My prayer is that you are right now building a foundation saying, God, I'm not going to enter that slippery slope. I'm not going to start to give myself in small ways to where, God, you begin to bless me with great skill, whether it's athletic skill, whether it's just an incredible intellect, whether it's the ability to communicate, whatever it is that God's given you, God, how can I use this for your glory and not my own? And that is a hard battle because the world keeps telling you it's about you, right? And you're constantly having to say, you know what, God, no, I want to use this for your glory. I want to share a couple stories of people who have been faithful with what God gave them. Jean Marie, I meet in Rwanda. Of course, hopefully you've seen the movie, Hotel Rwanda. If you haven't seen it, go see it. It's an eye-opener as to what happened in 1994 with the genocide. So one of the results of genocide is not just dead bodies, but it's widows. A lot of times the women are left behind. So when I meet Jean Marie after the genocide, she tells me, you know, there were tons of ladies, mothers, walking around going, what are we going to do? Our husbands have been killed. What do we have? What do we have in our hands? Now, she's a believer, and so you know, many of the women would start to give their bodies, right? When a woman in poverty has nothing, but she needs to feed her child, a lot of times these women will look around and say, the only thing I have to offer this world is my body. Jean Marie grabbed 23 women around her, and she said, ladies, we're not going to do that. We have other options. And they're looking at her going, we don't have much. She said, I'm not asking you what you don't have. I'm asking you what you do have. She said, do you at least have $1? The lady said, we don't even have $1. She said, do you at least have 10 cents? And all 23 ladies said, yes, we have at least the equivalent in Rwandan money, a dime. They threw it in the middle. They together had $2.30. Jean Marie said, I'm going to start a business. She started a charcoal business, which of course in Africa is brilliant because everybody needs charcoal. That charcoal business grew into basically a chicken business, a goat business. When I met her, they had saved up over $23,000 and had a taxi business. Who's feeding their own children now? Are they eating out of USAID bags? No. Those mothers are feeding their own children. Dignity is restored. Why? Because one woman said, Lord, I want to be faithful with what you have in my hands. I'm not going to dismiss it and say it's only a dime. God, you can use this. And she changed 23 lives. She changed actually 23 generations of children now who are being fed by their mothers and looking at life differently. And I also love her perspective on community, which I think the developing world does so much better than we do. She didn't take her own money and go in the corner and say, what do I have? The pronoun she used was we. What do we have? Which is also a great application for us as a college here, saying, what do we have at Montreat College? What is it that we can do in groups instead of just individually? Which is so counter thought in the Western world. One of my favorite people I've met on the field is Robert here on the left. Robert is a former professional soccer player in Uganda, blew out both his knees, ended up living in the slums of Uganda, loves the Lord, looked around at all these kids in the slums, roaming around. They have nowhere to go. They're not in school. And he asked the same question I asked you. God, what do I have in my hands? I don't even have any knees anymore. I can't even play soccer with these kids. And he thought, and he said, you know what? I know how to play chess. This is what I have in my hands. Now, how many of you ever played chess before? Extremely difficult game. What he loves about it, and I think he's spot on, he said it teaches you two things. It teaches you to think ahead, and it teaches you how to problem solve. And if you really think about education, it's not about GPAs. If you can think ahead and problem solve, you're going to be successful. And Robert said, I don't have thousands of dollars to start a foundation. I can't even open a school, but I can teach these poor kids to think ahead and problem solve. So he took his about $50. He got a big bowl of soup. He got a chessboard, a couple chessboards, and he started the camp. Fiona walks in at 9 years old. Her dad had died of AIDS. Her mom is struggling. She's not in school. She's in danger of being trafficked as she's roaming through the slums. She walks in. Now, it's predominantly a boys' game, but Fiona picks it up, starts to play, and she starts to get really good really fast. And Robert's watching her, and he's saying, Fiona, I have boys who've been playing for years now. And now at 11 years old, she gets on an airplane for the first time in her life. She flies to the continent championships. She returns as the youngest chess champion in the history of Africa. I come back to the States. This story is just blowing my mind, and it starts to kind of trickle out a little bit. Tim Crothers, who's a Sports Illustrated writer, got wind of it. He's the same guy that discovered Tiger Woods. And so he sends me an email, and he says, David, is this story for real? If so, I want to get on the airplane. Let's go back to Uganda, and I want to write a book about her. Well, long story short, if you go to Barnes & Noble today, you can read The Queen of Catway by Tim Crothers. Disney, a few months ago, released their upcoming films for the next year. The Queen of Catway by Disney will be released in the next year. Now, this has nothing to do with silent images or what we produce. We produced a very short film. It was fun to do it. The hero here is who? Robert. Robert's the hero. I mean, Fiona is a chess phenom. She is amazing. And I love to, if you read any of her interviews now, she's been the ABC Person of the Year. Of the week. She's been on ESPN and CNN. Every time she gets interviewed, all she says is, I play chess for the glory of God. That's why I play. And she said, I don't even plan, I want to be a doctor. I want to go to school and be a doctor and go back and help Uganda. She's an amazing young girl. But Robert, how we see the world impacts how we serve the world. Robert said to me, David, when missionaries come here from the States, the way they see our poor children in the slums of Uganda, they often see them and they give them shoes and shirts and candy. They see them as children that need material things. We often see the solution as being material. He said, David, the most valuable asset in the slums of Uganda are the minds of our children. Just because they're poor doesn't mean they're dumb. And he sees that, and he gets it. And I guarantee you, when missionaries go, they go to Robert. Robert, you show us the way as to how we need to serve the slums of Uganda. Has he solved all the poverty in the slums? Nope. That wasn't his goal. His goal was to simply serve with what God had put in his hands, and that was a few dollars and a chessboard. There are great stories of people in the Bible who used what they had in their hands, right? Mary Magdalene, perfume. Jesus, I give you what I have, and I give it all right now. I love Peter, just a simple fisherman. I'm going to be a fisherman of men. I'm going to take whatever skill you've given me, and I'm going to continue to use it. Nehemiah was a cupbearer, right? How do I use this to serve however and get access to places? God, whatever you've given me in my hands, I want to use it. I love David, shepherd boy. Now, what's interesting about David, which I think is a great kind of a lesson for us too, is that the things that were put in his hands changed. He was a shepherd boy, right? He had a staff, but he was faithful with that staff. And people often skip to, and then he became king, right? But there's something in the middle there. Do you remember how he went to the battlefield? He wasn't sent to go battle. He was sent to deliver lunch, right? He was sent to deliver food to the soldiers. And so he faithfully said, God, okay, I'll go deliver lunch. I'll be a servant. And he showed up and he became king. And of course, then a rock was put in his hands, and he faithfully used that. But I think, one of the great things that we walk away learning is that, God puts different things in our hands, and people often ask me, David, how do you find your passion? I want to find out what I'm passionate about. And I correct him and I say, it's not about finding your passion. It's about being passionate about everything you do. Whether you're delivering lunch to soldiers or taking a rock and becoming king, be faithful with what God has given you right now. And a few years from now, he might put something else in your hands. And if you're sitting here and you're wondering, I don't know what I have in my hands. I really have no idea. You know what? That's an okay place to be. Because, I love the story of the man with the withered hand that approached Jesus. And he got close to Jesus, and Jesus restored his hand. And I don't know what he was. I want to pretend like he was a painter or a carpenter. And he used that hand once God restored him and said, I have plans for you. Go use your hand for my glory. Go make something beautiful. And sometimes some of us just don't feel beautiful. I love, back on the theme of King David, the statue. Have you ever heard the story of the statue of King David? Michelangelo, in the 1500s, when that big stone was sitting, it sat for years. And people, artists, they were approached. The stone was put in front of them saying, make something beautiful out of this stone. And it sat because all the artists before Michelangelo saw that stone, and they saw a huge crack right down the middle of it. And they said, that stone, nothing good can come out of that stone. There's a crack in it. Michelangelo looked at it, and he saw potential. He saw the crack, and there's great stories about how he kind of worked around the brokenness of that stone. But he worked and he chiseled and he chiseled and he chiseled, still aware of the brokenness, but produce one of the most beautiful pieces of art in the history of the world. And I feel like many times that's my story, that's our story as Christians, saying, I am broken. There are parts of me that just don't make sense, that I'm going, God, could you really use me? Because I don't feel beautiful right now. And this journey that you're on right now, your story is God chiseling and saying, there is something beautiful. And I'm going to craft, and I know where your brokenness is, but that's okay. And eventually I'm going to start to put things in your hands. And I'm going to say, I'm going to say at the end, well done, good and faithful servant. Well done, good and faithful servant. You didn't solve all the problems of the world. I'm not going to solve human trafficking with this, but I hope that the Lord will say, you use what I put in your hands faithfully. And for you, as you go from here, joyfully turn on the news. When you see the brokenness, look for the brokenness, and keep asking yourself, when I graduate here from Montreal, not just when I graduate, but this summer, tomorrow, today, what are those things? Where is that place that God's calling me to deliver lunch to a bunch of soldiers? And I want to do that with passion, because I want to see what the Lord's going to put in my hands. And I'm not called to save everyone or do everything, but I'm called to do something. And so what is that something that Lord calls you to today? And do it with passion and do it with faithfulness. Pass it on to you. Thank you for having me.
David, thank you very much. That challenge is real. Would you please stand and come together? And as you begin to take that long, hard look at what God has placed in your hands, remember too the friendships that you have in your hands right now, that journey with you, that help you discern the people near you that know you, and you can say, what do I have in my hands? They can help you with that. Friends, as you go to take what you've got for the glory of God, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up the light of his countenance and give you his peace, now and forevermore. Amen.